Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. In solidarity with our new First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Mariangela Maguire. Thank you so much for joining me today. My topics on this show are intended to support people on their mindfulness journey. Mindfulness, bringing our attention to the present moment without judgment. It's a simple goal, right? But it's devilishly difficult, as I say in the intro, to put some of that principle into practice in our daily lives. But its value, or the value of mindfulness and those practices, is that they bring us greater inner peace. And being peaceful within ourselves means that we're able to bring more peace into the world around us. And I think regardless of what's happening in our lives right now, being the source of greater peace for our own self and for the people around us and for the world in general is a worthy aspiration. I am absolutely delighted today to have as my guest Daniel-Pineau. Dan's a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology at the University of Mississippi. He's a passionate proponent of mental health literacy, and I'm very interested in the research projects he's developed about disseminating evidence-based mental health information, including about mindfulness, and effective strategies for making tools like mindfulness available particularly to college students. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm delighted.
Good. How are you feeling today? You had a long drive recently, right?
I did. And so a long drive that is culminating into this now nerve-wracking experience.
I am too far away to bite you, so just relax. Everything will be fine. So we do this thing that I think you'll appreciate, is that we start each show with a breathing exercise because frankly it helps me calm down. So you mind joining me with that?
Absolutely, of course.
Okay, so we're going to use Lori Cameron. We focus on our breath because it does help us take a pause in the busyness of our lives. It helps us feel calm and centered and focused. And we're going to use Lori Cameron, who's a mindfulness educator's 3 deep breaths practice. So we take the first breath and we just focus on the sensation of our breath entering and exiting our bodies. In the second breath, we notice any place where we feel tension and consciously relax. And then for that third breath, we're going to set our intention for this moment. What do we need right now to be present? So first breath, just pay attention to your breathing. Second breath, any place you're feeling tension, relax. And then third breath, set your intention for this moment. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for joining me with that. So Dan, you have done a lot of really interesting work in even though you're very early in your career, you've had a lot of great experiences, both clinical experiences and research experiences. But I always like to start by wondering what brought you into this particular field in the first place, either in terms of your own personal experience, but also what questions were you hoping to answer, what problems were you hoping to solve?
I started my, I guess, education trajectory being in pre-med, and I think it is a common calling sign as I hit organic chemistry, and so that's not quite what I want to do.
Right.
And so, and this is also based on my mama's recommendation is let's start putting in humanity into this,
Ah.
which then led to psychology and understanding human behavior,
Mm-hmm.
which then led me to applying to graduate school at the University of Mississippi, which then snowballed into how do I make mental health literacy or practices able to be both humanist as well as grounded in empirical science and basis. And that's where I found my passion.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's interesting to see those two things come together. So, when you decided to really focus on evidence-based practices and bringing that kind of mental health literacy, why that? Why what do you see going on in the culture that makes mental health literacy such a critical topic?
I think again, a very big question
Yeah.
um, is one thing that I'm finding is that mental health, just in and of itself, has a lot of misinformation about what that is, how it
Mhm.
presents. There's disinformation about mental health is only um, people acting quote unquote crazy or whatever, but
Mhm.
sometimes it's a struggle that most folks can't see or maybe don't notice. And so bringing that mental health literacy to
Mhm.
college students of saying that it's okay to be struggling, that it's okay to feel anxious, and
Mhm.
how do we give them tools in their toolbox to be able to address those particular things instead of avoiding them. Um,
Mhm. So from your perspective, would you talk about and use a phrase like mental health to, I mean, it's funny, when I hear that phrase, I always think, I tend to think of somebody with it's a mental health problem. But what I hear you saying is that, of course, all of us have mental health, and we're not just not all taking care of it, right? Like we might think of our bodies as wanting to be healthy, eating right. We could be treating our minds the same way. Is that what you mean?
yeah, it's the way that I see because I don't like calling anything problems or
Oh, okay.
so it's difficulties is the way that
Okay.
I describe them, but it's the way that I see individuals who like come to see me for treatment is
Mhm.
every behavior, every action works until it doesn't. And
Ah,
so when they come into my office is okay, recognizing something's not working
okay.
and how do we find a better repertoire or a better tool set to be able to confront is a little aggressive, but address
Okay. All
those
right.
things.
Okay, yeah. And so when did you start talking or looking into things like, I know mindfulness isn't the only tool you think about and study, but so what are some of the others and why that? Why that one in particular though?
Well, mindfulness is the way that I see mindfulness and some of the other projects is based on a couple of empirically supported dialectic behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy are two things that I tend to lean into
Okay.
um, as far as where I draw my motivation for. So, values oriented engagement. But as I'm looking at mindfulness itself, it's a way to get individuals to a threshold to then start making changes. It's hard
Ah,
to it's it's hard to notice what behaviors aren't working if you're not aware of your individual physical
oh,
sensations, feelings, behaviors, thoughts. Once you're
okay.
starting to be present in those thoughts, then we can. Um, the metaphor that I use is yes and from improv comedy is
Uh-huh.
mindfulness is the yes, and now we start moving into a direction that is engaged with the things that people care about.
Okay. Oh, I love that. So mindfulness is kind of a foundation from which more insight, knowledge, and change can come. Is that
Mhm.
okay? Is that
Absolutely,
what
yeah.
you said? Yeah, okay. Well, you use some other phrases in there about acceptance and commitment and et cetera. And so we're going to come back and we're going to unpack a little bit of that too, because I want to hear what other tools you think are kind of important for people to know about and that we can use. And particularly as we talk about young people and the kind of the particular challenges that they face. So we'll be right back after the break, folks. You're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. And I'm here with Dan-Pineau, and we're going to talk more about these important topics in just a moment. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire, the host of the show, and I'm here today with Dan Pineau, who's a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology at the University of Mississippi. And Dan's been looking at mental health literacy, really bringing college students in particular to a greater understanding of what it means to have a mental health difficulty and how to use something like mindfulness to lay a groundwork for being able to notice one's behaviors and then from there, Dan, you were saying, act on what those observations are. So could you just expand on that a little bit more? Tell us a little bit more, maybe when you think about it in terms of your clinical practice of where do we go from, or where do you go with clients from that mindfulness foundation into change?
Yeah, that's the point of therapy, I guess, or at
Uh-huh.
least the way that I've seen it with my clients is um, mindfulness sets the foundation of being aware of the feelings that are coming in or the thoughts that are coming in, and instead of trying to push them away, which I think is a misconception, especially in college students, about
Hmm.
mindfulness, is it's just a relaxing tool. Um,
Oh, okay.
but this is one that's being aware of those, and then I think I used the metaphor yes and is yes, I am
Yeah.
feeling these things, and now where do we go?
Hmm.
One of my supervisors was the progenitor of a thing called acceptance and commitment therapy, which highlighted meaning making and value oriented behaviors even while feeling uncomfortable.
Hmm.
So mindfulness isn't supposed to get away from that uncomfortable feeling. It's supposed to, yes, acknowledge that and do something that is in line with the things that you care about.
So can you give us an example of that? Like how might that work for a client you're working with?
Yeah, there's a couple of clients that I've had, and one that I have in mind is, especially now during this COVID unpleasantness, is they were very anxious and nervous about going home to see their family, and
Oh,
so, which rightfully so,
right.
but it was becoming so debilitating that they also would not text their family. They wouldn't reach
Oh,
out on
wow.
social media with their family
Hmm.
because of all of those uncomfortable things that were
Hmm.
bubbling up. And so mindfulness in this particular sense was acknowledging that uncomfortableness and then orienting to what kind of relationship do you want to have with your family? Well, I want
Hmm.
to talk with them, of course. And
Right.
so, and so well, what would it be like to be present in that moment, in that text, and instead of trying to block down all of these emotions,
Ah,
acknowledging them, it's that yes, and
okay.
this is something that I
Okay.
want to do.
Was the person able to kind of work with that and reach
Yeah,
out
yeah,
then?
yeah. It took a little bit of doing, but
Uh-huh.
yes.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so, as part of that values and it's the acceptance, that mindfulness acceptance of all of these uncomfortable emotions, and then the commitment to
Mhm.
this is something that I care about, even while I'm feeling uncomfortable. Is
Mhm.
I think in my practice, it's the whole point of therapy is to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, and so
Uh-huh.
now we start moving from there. That's the end point.
Hmm. Is it hard to convince people that of that it's okay to feel to live in that discomfort, to allow the discomfort to come? I mean, are most people very quick to, I don't know, Dan, not sure I
Oh,
trust that.
absolutely, yes, and I think that's also just human nature. Is you feel
Hmm.
something hard coming up, of course you're going to not want to move towards it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's a lot, especially with college students, is there's a misconception of what mindfulness is. It's sitting cross-legged, surrounded by candles, in, in a dark room, and finally achieving transcendence. But it doesn't have to look like that. It can be there were a couple of clients that we modified mindfulness to be dancing or to be
Oh, really?
cooking or to be eating. It's
Hmm.
just the present moment awareness and looking at just what's going on right now,
Hmm.
which then led to I'm here and I'm in this moment. And now, how am I going to express this moment to the people that I care about?
Hmm. Hmm. What other kinds of mindfulness practices in that kind of embodied way do you encourage people to use?
Uh, I've encouraged a lot. It looks
Uh-huh.
very different for
Okay.
it looks very different for a lot of folks. It's
Hmm.
is because, for example, even our starting exercises, I notice my like legs shaking and moving
Uh-huh.
around, and I think mindfulness is not something that can or should be perfected. It's something
Oh.
that is a practice. It's a muscle to flex in
Hmm.
even easy times to then use in harder times.
Right.
And so other practices that I use in mindfulness is clients would come to me and say, okay, I didn't like that sitting still for a little bit. Okay, well, what if we don't have to sit still?
Uh-huh.
And then it's dancing. One of my clients was learn salsa and merengue. So I said,
Uh-huh.
how do you know where to step? Do you know where your body is? Well, let's focus on that, where your hands are, where your feet
Mm-hmm.
are. Well, do you notice anything in the music? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you're only listening to the bass drum. Maybe you're only listening to the guitar. Maybe you're only listening to all of these things. But each one of those is a way to throw your senses to being in that moment at that
Mm-hmm.
time.
Okay, not making your to-do list, not worrying about the past or the future.
Mm,
Right,
yeah.
exactly. How do you help people move from, okay, I'm going to practice mindfulness in this very engaging, fully embodied experience of dance, and then how do I transition then into to doing the same thing when I'm dealing with stress or anxiety or fear?
That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
um, it's easy to practice mindfulness when it's easy to practice mindfulness, and I'm
Yeah.
putting that into italics. It's
Yeah.
like right now it's easy to practice mindfulness because your listeners and ourselves are sitting in a chair and like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we can do this.
Right.
But the more that it's practiced, the more that it's flexed, then we can start implementing that particular practice into more difficult situations. It
Mm-hmm.
generalizes out
Okay.
into other situations.
Right. Okay. And so tell me a little bit about other kinds of clinical experiences you've had where you've, I guess I'm going to just go ahead and ask you. I understand you used to work with law students.
I did, yeah.
So I'm curious about that because I think I have a lot of clients who are high achievers, and I think high achievers have very interesting challenges.
Mm.
I had a client who said to me one time when we were talking about anxiety, and she said, "Hey, my anxiety got me on the law review in law school. So, my anxiety in some ways has been my friend." So, right. So what was your experience like? And did you have that? Did high achievers, did you think that was a distinct kind of clientele in terms of their concerns and difficulties?
I think the folks who applied to law school,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a reason that they applied to law school. One of the hard parts is, as you said, my anxiety got me here.
Right.
Is my then next question is, what if it didn't have to be that way? If you
Uh,
didn't have to feel uncomfortable so
mhm.
much that you had to push yourself, what are those things that you care about outside of law school?
Mhm.
And so, yes, I did have a couple of clients that were, what would it be like to be a human being for a second? And that's where mindfulness then came in, is asking them to slow
Mhm.
down and acknowledge, or even just recognize what's going on
Mhm.
in that moment at that time. And
Mhm.
that was really, really hard for them.
Right.
And also for college students, first
Mhm.
generation, uh, diverse individuals.
Mhm.
All of that is really hard to acknowledge and then also to express.
Mhm.
Here is what I'm experiencing right now in this moment.
Mhm. Besides the not wanting to feel discomfort, in your experience, what are people most afraid of in terms of that question of what would it mean to slow down? What would it mean to be happy? Those kinds of what do you notice people are fearful will happen if they let their guard down?
From what my clients tell me, and this is
Mm-hmm.
also coming from both I can't say professional because I'm still in training, but also
Yeah,
personal experience being in graduate school,
sure.
is if I stop, I won't continue.
Okay.
And that's one of the things, is they keep pushing and pushing and burning out
Mm-hmm.
until a point is that you burn out so much that your body can't physically continue. So mindfulness is a way to, um, a metaphor that I use is, we're not pumping the brakes, is we're
Uh-huh.
taking the foot off the gas just for a second.
Oh, that's interesting. And that people think that letting go is pumping the brakes. It's coming to a full kind of screeching stop, as opposed to and it. So it sounds like people sometimes have kind of polarized thinking that it's kind of an all or nothing. I either have to be going 150 miles an hour or I've stopped completely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so putting in mindfulness in between there, it's
Hmm.
even in the shift of a car, which I'm not a car person, but I find myself going to that
Hmm.
metaphor is
Yeah.
if you're pedal to the metal the entire time,
Hmm.
the transition between taking your foot off the pedal and
Hmm.
moving over to the brake, in that
Oh,
transition is where mindfulness happens. Is okay, we can pump the brakes at any time. We can
right.
also hit the gas at any time. But right
Hmm.
now, we're in that moment of let's acknowledge what's happening and let's
Okay.
use some kind of tool or some kind of force to be able to acknowledge here's what's happening.
Okay. Oh, I love that metaphor. That really, I mean, it's visual, it's physical, it's very common. Yeah, I bet it really works for people. Yeah, I love that. Okay. Well, we're gonna take another break, and when we come back, I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more about, I think a lot of our listeners are probably people with maybe college age children of their own, or maybe they're college age people. And so what are some, things that I have some questions about that, about how people might help other people as well as use these practices themselves. So, um, that's what we'll talk about, among other things, after the break. You're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio, and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and I'm here with my guest today, Dan Pineau. Dan's a doctoral student in clinical psychology at the University of Mississippi, and he works with people to use mindfulness practices to get to lay a foundation to understand and recognize our thoughts and feelings, and from that recognition, then be able to act in ways, I think, Dan, you would put it, in line with our values. So instead of being kind of reactive because we're in a spin and we're worried about things too much, to be able to be calmer, to notice our thoughts and feelings, and then sort of make that pause, if I'm understanding correctly, really allows us to align our actions with our values. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I think so. It's I think you said it beautifully with the instead of reacting
Mm-hmm.
to an emotional response or even a situational response, is then aligning to what are the actions going to be, whether it's against our values or for them.
Okay, great. I think when I think about who listens to this show, I'm hopeful that there are some young people who listen to this show, but I imagine there are also plenty of people who are parents of young adults, maybe even college students or college age students. And I think about my own mother's experience watching her deal with my sister who has had a lot of mental health challenges and difficulties in her life, of kind of knowing how to respond when someone in your life is struggling. And whether it's the struggle of a kind of that might seem really commonplace, like I don't know what to do with my life, or to the far more serious, suicidal ideation, etc. Is there a way that you would, if you had all the power in the world, which I would be happy to give you personally, you seem fabulous. um, what would you encourage people to do? How would you like, and especially like, I don't mean to put too much into this question, but if I have a mindfulness practice, should I try to make my kid do mindfulness practice too?
No, you're right. That is a pretty big question. I as far as research that
Hmm.
I've read, and I don't particularly work with young adults, so 15
Hmm.
to 18-year-olds as college students, is
Hmm.
that if students are or if kids are dealing with things and you're suspecting it, the first step is ask.
Hmm.
Which usually, if you ask, then the most immediate response is no, get out of my room.
Right.
But but to keep asking, and this is where mindfulness and compassion can come in, is that being rebuffed in that sense isn't a value judgment, isn't something that has to be internalized. It's just maybe they're not ready to talk about it. There's a lot of resources online
Hmm.
that I found really helpful with my work with college students is,
Hmm.
hey, you don't have to come and talk to me face to face, but here's a list of websites that are free. Here's a list of YouTube videos that are evidence-based and free.
Hmm.
You don't have to talk to me about it, but I'm here if you're ready.
Okay. I think I really love that answer because the first thing you said I think is so important in that it's we is if I have a mindfulness practice and I'm worried about somebody else, bringing that practice into that moment where I'm asking about their concerns or I'm inviting them to talk to me and not taking their response personally, not making it because it's so easy then to shift into either I would guess with parents and family members a kind of conflict oriented conversation, but also to feel rejected by that, to feel like it's about me. So bringing my own mindfulness practices to bear when I'm concerned about another person, that just seems really profound and really an important comment to make. Um,
Yeah, it's gently orienting both not only the person that you're talking to, orienting them to the conversation of
mhm,
what difficulty is happening, but also
mhm,
orienting yourself to what responses might be happening. Um,
mhm,
there's a book we talked about acceptance and commitment therapy called Mindfulness for Two, which is a practitioner's guide.
mhm,
But it's something that I have found pretty helpful is sometimes when you ask a question and you get pushback, it's very, very easy for you to say that pushback was because I'm not doing my job.
right.
And so the next step is with, especially with my business, is okay, hold on. Let me acknowledge and accept that that thought is happening.
Mhm,
And then coming back to it in kindness is
mhm,
that gentleness and that kindness is I did something that I cared about, reaching
mhm,
out to
mhm,
my progeny, and then coming back and saying I'll reach out as many times as I have to.
mhm. And I think the other thing that's implied in that that seems very consistent with mindfulness is not being too attached to the outcome, right? That the only thing that can happen here is that you can listen to me and do what I tell you to do or ask you to do or want you to do, right? But to say I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to always be open and kind and gentle towards you, but I'm not going to assume that there's only one good outcome here and that I already know what it is, right?
And also the flip side, not only I'm going to be kind of gentle to them, I'm going to be kind and gentle also to myself as I'm working towards the things that I care about. Is
Mm-hmm.
um, as one of my supervisors says, everything can go terribly, horribly wrong. And sure, that's an option, but also it can also go terribly, awesomely right. And it depends. And you're not the architect of that. That's where the mindfulness practice comes in, is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
allowing things to happen as they are.
Mm-hmm. And I think you make such an important point too about the compassion and the kindness has to be towards the self. One of my favorite mindfulness educators is Jack Cornfield, and he always says, compassion that doesn't include the self is incomplete. And so I really I think that's such a and of course it's also then modeling the behavior for the person you're speaking to when you are kind to yourself. Um, so you're in a helping profession. So I just want to put you on the spot for a second to say, must be very important to you to help others. Do you find it challenging then to be kind and compassionate towards yourself?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's in any mental health profession, the way that I've seen, or even just in my cohort, or in people who have gone above and beyond and have their PhDs and are working like professionally, is yes, sometimes you get through a day of seeing very emotionally, and I want to phrase this as emotionally draining, not that the patients are draining on me, but
Right.
just that it's so hard to be in the room with that pain, with that suffering
Mm-hmm.
for that long. So,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it is very hard sometimes, but also sometimes it's easy when you come into the room and your patients say, "Yeah, we did it! Like
Right.
we did the yes and the and it's it is so immediately rewarding, but also immediately um, hard to sit with that pain. And so with
Mm-hmm.
the mindfulness when I get home from the day, or when I think any practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
correct me if I'm wrong, is um, at the end of the day, it's okay. Now we're going to be in this moment at our home, not in practice. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's hard.
Yeah, yeah. Are there mindfulness practices that you've particularly incorporated into your daily life or into your life in a more general sense that you found effective?
Yeah, one that I've recommended to my clients is cooking is a really big one that I've used.
Okay.
So, or I've had a couple of clients who bake, or a couple of
Okay.
clients who are trying new recipes, or some clients said, I have all these things, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. And
Mm-hmm.
so I tell them, well, let's feel it out. Feel the texture of the peppers, feel the
Mm-hmm.
weight of it in your hand, smell the things as they're sauteing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just don't be so focused. I shouldn't say that. Move away from the recipe and
Mm-hmm.
start being present in actually what's the grinding, what's the ingredients, what's the smell, what's the
Mm-hmm.
feel. Um, that's one that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that has worked pretty well with a couple of my clients as well. Is
Mm-hmm.
I tried this new recipe from my grandma, and then as I was doing this, I was thinking of my grandma, but I was in the moment, and
Oh,
I was putting all this together, and then I put it in the oven, and then I had to wait an hour, and so I just smelled and existed for just a minute. Is
nice.
Yeah.
That is really great. And I think one of the things embedded in your comment in that example was move away from the recipe. I think that's so interesting because I think my experience, I cook a lot and I like to cook, but I've grown in my enjoyment of it in part because I often had treated recipes as kind of that internal critic. Like it's almost as if the recipe is telling you're doing it wrong, right? Did
Yeah.
you chop that correctly? Do you know what this ingredient is, right? That's not folding it, right? I mean, you can really make anything in your life kind of an internal critic. But so to let go of it a little bit and to be more aware of, as you said, the textures, the smells, the feel of all of it is a very different way to cook.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a holding gently to a recipe, and
oh, that's nice.
that's even moving into humans, holding gently to a behavior or a thought.
Mm,
Here's the gentleness, the kindness, and the compassion that then says, well, we have all of this repertoire that we're going to be able to use.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, we're going to take our final break, and when we come back, we're going to ask Dan what, if he really was empowered to rule the world, what would he like everybody to know and do to bring more mindfulness into their daily lives? So you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio, and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and I'm here today with my wonderful guest, Dan-Pineau, who's a doctoral candidate at the University of Mississippi in clinical psychology. And he uses mindfulness practices in his clinical practice, as well as it being an aspect of his research agenda, and particularly to use mindfulness as a kind of foundation with clients so that they can then, having brought full awareness to their feelings and their thoughts, be able to act on those feelings and thoughts in a responsive rather than reactive way, and in a way that's in alignment with their values. So, Dan, you've talked to us a little bit about your work, and your work is primarily with college age students. Is there anything else you would want to say to them or to their parents about dealing with mental health challenges and difficulties?
Is one of the hardest things that I found with dealing as a harsh word, with interacting with
Okay.
college students, is that there's a lot of misconceptions about what mental health is. When is the line to draw? When is the now I have to go seek outside help? And
Mm-hmm.
so with mindfulness, and what I'm trying to do with my dissertation, is that there's so many proactive ways to be able to mitigate that
Okay.
before it comes to the point of, well, I'm thinking of killing myself, or I'm so stricken by panic that I can't go to class. Is There's so many tools to be able to use before that,
Mm-hmm.
that can help that before it gets to that uh, tipping point.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really an important point because I I think in our, everyday culture, if we think about things like suicide or people in deep depression or anxiety, that it's almost as if we think they started there, as
Mhm.
opposed to understanding that there was time before, not that every one of those situations can be avoided or those experiences, but that all of us could be practicing kind of better mental health in our daily lives, that for some people that would mitigate that and prevent those more serious consequences. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Is the way that I see mental health is you've had probably 10, 20, 30 years of behaving in a way that worked, and now you're in a new situation where it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So, what if there was a time where you also had all of these resources and all of these internet websites, videos, podcasts
Okay,
to
right.
be able to incorporate this kind of practice? Um, and just knowing about
Mm-hmm. Right. And there is, I mean, people have so much access. I always, say with kind of mindfulness, your mind's going to do something. You might as well kind of make some choices about what your mind is doing.
it.
People are going to watch podcasts and videos and read books, etc. Might as well have really great healthy alternatives out there. So what is, Dan, because you're early in your career, I'm curious, what's the dream? Like if you could really, what's the biggest difference you hope to make, I would say, with your work?
Oh, well, you asked what the dream was, and
Mhm.
the dream is to be king of the world, I guess. But
Okay. Have a plan for
um,
that?
but I think what I want to do with my practice and where I've oriented my skill set working in the law school, working at our university's counseling center, working in a clinic with my
Mhm.
department is college students are such an interesting grab bag of backstories and whether they're first generation, whether it's multicultural, whether there's LGBT information, is that there is so much stuff going on that is so hard and difficult in a transitionary stage. Is I want to be able to give them the resources to be able to address those changes in the most healthy and healthy by their standards, not mine,
Mhm.
healthy by their standards, way possible.
Mhm. Okay. What do you think? Do you think that these kind of the media that you're using, that this is really a unique opportunity to disseminate mental health information in new ways?
I think so. It's working at um, the University of Mississippi. Is we're located right north of the Delta, which is historically the most impoverished place in the entire United States.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there are people who come from there who have no idea what mental health is. You also have people who are born in very rich and affluent areas who also don't have ideas of what mental health is. And
Right.
so those transitions and those uh, conflagrations of everybody coming together and molding and melding is
Mm-hmm.
that's where I want to be, right in the middle of that, to say,
Okay.
guess what, here's our resources, here's the things that you can do, here's
Mm-hmm.
where outreach can help. And yeah, it's scary to reach out, but it is also very effective, and there's evidence to support that. Even if you just say, here's my business card, that there
Uh-huh.
is information to be able to be had.
Okay. And so, in addition to one-on-one counseling, have you been engaged with kind of programming or ways to get information out to students? And what have you worked with, and what have you enjoyed or found effective?
My favorite position was working at our law school at the University of Mississippi, because I was able to do both individual counseling and then also groups, like
Oh.
support groups, reach out to different organizations, so Greek organizations, historically Black Black organizations, Latinx organizations,
Mm-hmm.
all of those, to be able to say, hey, here is a tool that you can use
Mm-hmm.
at any time,
Uh-huh.
specific to mindfulness. And so I've had a lot of individuals post after working there come up and say, I never thought that that was actually what mindfulness was. But then
Ah,
using the example is like, oh, and then I started using it every day as I started working forward.
mhm.
So that's what I want to do is universities have a built-in organizational structure that you can
Right.
just pinpoint every single group,
Hmm.
um, especially ones that may have either been disenfranchised or like put off onto the side, is you can reach out at any of them and be able to make a difference, even if it's on a one-to-one or a or group level.
Hmm. And what do you think that you do in particular? I mean, what do you bring to this as, I'll just say it, a straight white male? How is it that you're able to, I don't know, maybe transcend that, or what makes it, how are you able to reach people who are different from you about such personal and difficult issues?
That is an excellent question and something that I've had to study quite a bit. Yeah, I identify as a straight white cisgender heterosexual male, and
Mm-hmm.
so when I'm going into a session with somebody who is not exactly those identifiers, there is already guardedness, and that's where mindfulness can come in. Is both on my own part of okay, I know that there's guardedness here, and I know that I'm not maybe broaching subjects that are taboo, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do with that particular area is I put myself in situations that are uncomfortable. And so setting things out on the table, saying, hey, look, I identify as this, and I know you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So let me put myself in your shoes real quick. Let
Mm-hmm.
me try and understand what your experience is.
Mm-hmm.
And it is uncomfortable and it's hard. But
Mm-hmm.
if we're modeling that particular aspect of treatment, then that opens the door for them to also put their trust or to get into my shoes of, okay, that door has been opened. We have
Uh-huh.
reached the threshold. Now we have that yes and moment. Now we can address it.
I'm just really impressed and excited about how much of the practice that you're talking about is modeling the very behaviors that you are helping and encouraging someone else to participate in. And I mean, you really, that's making yourself very vulnerable. You're not some, distanced kind of figure, right?
Yeah.
Despite the beard and the glasses, right? But
Yeah, it's
you're really right there with them.
yeah,
That's for
it's I'm not the don't look behind the curtain, the
sure.
Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Is the one thing that I brought from mindful practice was being what's most personal is what's most global. And so if I acknowledge how uncomfortable it is to
Mm-hmm.
talk about this, it's
Hmm.
very likely that I can shape that behavior to have them talk about what's most uncomfortable with me. And
Okay. And
yeah,
it's been effective, it sounds like. You've really,
I hope so.
yeah, you've reached across a lot of barriers. That's wonderful. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a wonderful conversation, and I hope for listeners that you're as excited as I am to see a young person doing this incredible professional work and bringing mindfulness into these places where so many people are struggling. There's so much pressure on college students, law students particularly, of course, too, and to not only to promote these ideas, but to live them and to model them with people. I just really appreciate that about the work you're doing, Dan. So thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. McGuire. I appreciate it. And if I ever get a call back, let me know. I'd be happy to keep talking for hours.
I was just going to say, I hope you come back on the show. It would be great to have
Yeah.
you again. So that's great. So everybody, I hope you'll join me next week. It's Thursdays at noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern on Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Thanks for joining us today.